All right, good morning, everybody. This is James Morrow, meteorologist here at the National Weather Service in Raleigh. I'm joined by Nick Petro, the warning coordination meteorologist here, for your decision support briefing number 6 for Hurricane Florence as of 11:30 a.m. Monday, September 10th. As always, if you're tuning in a little bit after the fact, maybe a day or so after, go to our website, weather.gov/Raleigh. For the latest information. This is a very dynamic situation. Things often change several times throughout the day. And I just want to make sure you have the most accurate and up-to-date forecast as possible. So as we progress through the day, Nick, please jump in at any point to give your input. And really, things have kind of kept going as expected. So there hasn't been too much that has changed. We will go over some of the slight changes that have occurred in the track and the intensity, but the confidence continues to increase that life-threatening impacts will be felt across the Carolinas. This is a very serious situation that's unfolding. Our confidence that we will see impacts is almost at 100%. It's just whether or not, what impacts and the severity of those impacts, and that's what we'll focus on as we go throughout this conversation. So here's the latest update as of 11 a.m. today. Max winds are at 115 miles per hour. That puts Hurricane Florence at a Category 3 hurricane. It's located about 500 miles south-southeast of Bermuda, moving west at 13 miles per hour, and that's up by about 5 miles per hour compared to that of the 5 a.m. advisory this morning. And the pressure has dropped, which shows that the strengthening trend is likely to continue, at least for the next day, but it looks like the next couple of days we could see some strengthening along with this. And also notice that with time, our confidence gets better. So you see the cone beginning to shrink some with each advisory, and that shows that our confidence level is increasing. So the chances of this missing North Carolina or South Carolina is actually shrinking with each advisory. We are anticipating this to be a major impacting storm across the Carolina coastline and extending inland, and we'll go over some of those impacts as we progress.
While we are on this slide, just let me remind folks that the cone does not represent impacts. All that represents is where the center of the storm may go. So remember, the impacts, the hazards can extend well outside of this cone.
Yeah, that's a good point. And also notice at the very end, the forecast points start getting less and less further apart, and that does show what the trend has been in the last couple runs of this storm coming ashore and really slowing down as the storm pushes inland, which will actually exacerbate some of the hazards, including some of the inland flooding potential that we're going to see. And we'll go over that here in a few minutes. So here are the latest key messages for Hurricane Florence from the National Hurricane Center. Life-threatening storm surge along the coast is likely, especially along the coasts of South Carolina and North Carolina, but also parts of Virginia. So if you live out there or have family out there, storm surge will be a concern with this storm. Further inland where we are, the life-threatening impacts that we're likely to see include freshwater flooding. We're looking at quite a bit of rainfall, anywhere from 7 to even 15 inches of rain will be possible, if not a little bit higher than that, from this system. So we're expecting the rainfall to be one of the key impacts and one of the most life-threatening impacts across this area, but we also can't rule out damaging winds and also an isolated weak tornado or two, or actually quite a few when it comes to tropical. But right now, those specific type of impacts and the timing of those impacts are a little fuzzy. A lot of it depends on the eventual track of this storm, but there are some life-threatening impacts that we're expecting. And because of some of those impacts and the approach of a very strong system that's going to have quite a bit of rain, the National Hurricane Center is eyeing potential hurricane watches and tropical storm watches sometime to be issued possibly by Tuesday morning. So we'll be monitoring those closely. And now that we have the capability as an inland office to actually issue those products, don't be alarmed if you end up waking up tomorrow underneath a tropical storm watch or maybe even a hurricane watch if you're a little closer to the coast, because we are anticipating those type of conditions as we move forward. So taking a look at your tropical storm force wind speed probabilities, we are looking at very high probabilities of seeing these tropical storm force winds across much of North Carolina. Along the coast, we're seeing near 100% probabilities of seeing these type of conditions. But even far enough inland over Raleigh and even parts of the Triad, we're looking at anywhere from 70 to 90% chance of seeing tropical storm force conditions. This is a very serious situation. This isn't a 70% chance of thunderstorms. This is a 70% chance of getting significant winds at a sustained rate. So don't take this one lightly.
And to see those probabilities, 90% or higher, I mean, that's just, again, a representation of how confident we are that this is happening. So, again, don't take it lightly. And also, as James pointed out, again, how far inland that wind signal penetrates. So what the bottom line is we're expecting a lot of tree damage, a lot of trees down. So, sure. Just be ready for that.
That's good. And a big question is, when will these winds arrive? Because really, winds often are one of the first things that you notice about a tropical system that are incoming, other than maybe cloud cover. But one of the most sensible impacts are winds. And looking at this, Nick, this is the earliest reasonable arrival time for tropical storm force winds. Basically, what this is telling you is there is a possibility that winds of 39 miles an hour or greater may impact these areas as early as the lines dictate. So our biggest take-home message here is any preparations that you are doing to prepare for this system need to be done by dinner time Wednesday.
Right.
Make sure to have all those preparations already in place. The plans are in place, and act on those plans over the next 48 hours, because these conditions are going to arrive on our doorstep by dinner time Wednesday and progress, certainly be over us by Thursday during the daytime.
Yeah, let me add too, and just take an opportunity to answer one question that has come in. Melvin asked the question, how do you expect this to affect travel to and between Raleigh and Greensboro, Winston-Salem on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday? Well, that stretch that you just mentioned there, Melvin, covers a large portion of central North Carolina, so I thought now might be a good time to address that. Certainly, any travel that needs to be done on Wednesday should be wrapped up by certainly by nightfall. Early evening. Think about dinner time. Have everybody back by dinner time. Thursday and Friday, travel's going to be impeded. There's no doubt. So I would say, it might be tough to travel back and forth with trees down and blocking many roads, and water ponding on roadways and flooding issues. So flash flooding issues. There'll be two types of flooding issues. There'll be the flashy type that occurs with the initial heavy downpours that ponds in low spots, and then there'll be subsequent river flooding that is more prolonged and affects the river areas and adjacent. But we'll get to the rain in a minute here. But I just wanted to point out that, because Melvin, you were asking about Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Wednesday travel looks good as long as you get back by dinner time. And Thursday and Friday look pretty iffy to me, if not impossible.
Yeah, that was a great question, Melvin. And as we go along with this presentation, don't hesitate to send us questions using the question tab on your GoToWebinar. We will try to get to as many of them or all of them after we're done with the main set of slides here. All right, so we'll progress right into the rainfall that you kind of alluded to there. We are looking at significant amounts of rain. Here's your 7-day rainfall forecast, and keep in mind, most of this, if not all of this, is actually encompassing the main event as it's coming ashore. We're looking across North Carolina anywhere from 2 to 10 plus inches of rain, with over our area here in central North Carolina, that's more of the 4 to 10 plus range, and that in essence could actually be on the low side.
Yeah.
We've seen some estimates from models, and keep in mind these are forecast models. These aren't our forecast, of 20 plus inches in some localized spots. So we are going to be closely monitoring this forecast. And as we saw in Matthew, rainfall, which can lead to flooding, is actually more of a deadly, or it can end up being more deadly than being out on the coast, because on the coast you can evacuate. But inland, there's no place for everybody in North Carolina to go.
Well, not to confuse people who may be at the coast listening, let me tell you, there will be massive surge at the coast with this.
Definitely.
So keep in mind that water is going to affect the coast via storm surge with a lot of devastation, destruction, life-threatening. If you ride this out and you're listening from somewhere on the coast, I mean, there's a good chance you could lose your life.
That's right.
Because of the massive surge that's expected.
Yeah.
Okay. But even inland, there could be a substantial risk to life and property with the inland flooding. So both sides of this, water is going to impact the state.
Yep, that's a very good point. Another hazard that we could possibly see are tornadoes. So here is actually a day four convective outlook from the Storm Prediction Center, and they've marked about a 15% chance of severe weather, primarily in the form of gusty winds and tornadoes. So we wanted to quickly go through and talk about some of the tornado history, especially when it comes to tropical. Typically, tropical tornadoes tend to be on the short-lived side and on the weaker side. They're very shallow-based type of rotations, which makes them especially hard for us to forecast, but they tend to be localized, short-lived, and on the weaker side. We're talking, once surveyed, anywhere from EF0 to EF2 typically are the types of strengths that you get when it comes to these tropical type tornadoes. But typically what we recommend where to go is the lowest part of your building and in an interior room. So if you have a basement, that's the ideal location. If not, find a room without windows on the interior point of your sturdy structure, and put as many walls between you and the storm as possible. So, just to kind of go over the event summary right before we get to some questions here. Obviously, there's an increasing risk of several life-threatening impacts from Hurricane Florence. This includes storm surge at the coast, which could be deadly, freshwater flooding from prolonged heavy rainfall inland, and high winds later this week, much of which could extend several hundred miles from the center of the storm. So just because you're not being impacted from the center of the storm doesn't mean you're not at risk for winds, because those can often spread out hundreds of miles in each direction. And while it's too soon to determine the exact track, timing, and location of these impacts, residents of Central North Carolina should closely monitor the progress of Florence. Ensure that they have their plan already in place and follow any advice given by your local officials. That includes evacuations, especially along the coast. But if you know you're in a flood-prone area, find another place to go, whether it's a public shelter or a neighbor who lives a little bit higher ground. That's going to be really important for us, Nick,
right.
As we go forward.
Absolutely. Just, and Hurricane Matthew, and for folks who have been residents of Central North Carolina for a long time and remember Floyd, if you remember flooding that occurred where you're at, where you live, that's a good measure of maybe not necessarily exactly the type of flooding that will occur here, but that's a good way to gauge whether or not you're in a flood-prone area, of course. And remember, when you're considering whether or not you're in a flood-prone area, don't forget about your commute to and from work, because it may not flood at your home, it may not flood at your office, but it might flood in between those two. So keep that in mind as well when you're considering flood risk. So not to say that many people will be able to get out and about come Friday or even Saturday for that matter, but just remember that for later on. Now, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Good time for questions?
Yeah, we can go into questions.
Let's hit a few questions here because they're starting to stack up here.
Mm-hmm.
So Josh asked about, basically paraphrasing his question. He says, there's never been a storm that formed where Florence formed and then ended up hitting the East Coast without recurving of some sort. And what's the difference? And the difference in this particular case is the steering has been, the steering of Florence has been more attributed to the high pressure to the north, and the lack of recurvature is due to the existence of a stronger mid-level trough in the atmosphere back over the Tennessee Valley or maybe the Mississippi Valley or even the mountains. So it's just all a matter of different steering currents that has caused this to be a little I wouldn't say, well, obviously unusual, I guess, if it's never happened, but certainly, you can never rule anything out. But this is one thing we are lacking is a deeper trough to our west. So,
just to follow up with that one thing that's really tough for forecasters, to forecast is something that has never happened before. But when you see things that are stacking up that have also never happened before, like that abnormally strong ridge to our north and the lack of steering flow, that kind of gives us as the forecasters meaning to say, all right, well, maybe even though we haven't seen this on record, there's a potential for this to happen, and that's almost exactly what's happening in this scenario.
Absolutely. Next question, Rebecca asked about potential air travel Thursday and Friday, and clearly, the airlines are going to make the decision about whether or not they're gonna operate. But yeah, my advice there is just check with your carrier to find out what their plans are, because I would imagine they'll probably be sending out some sort of notification here. But so my advice, Rebecca, is just definitely check with your air carrier. Obviously, there'll be winds and rain and hazards around, so I'm sure they're probably going to have some kind of response. So anyway,
we had another question from Brent, and I actually don't have these statistics right in front of me, but how wide of a storm is Hurricane Florence? And when regards to the tropical storm force winds and hurricane force winds.
Yeah, we don't have that right here in front of us, but we could probably pull that up fairly quick.
Yeah.
You mind if I steer here?
Not at all.
Brent, hang on for a minute, and we'll try to pull that up if you're willing to bear with us here for a second. So.
Yeah, and while he's looking that up, if it's all right with you, Nick, I'll go on to the next question from Thomas. When do we expect Florence to depart North Carolina? Meaning, how long do we expect the winds to last? And models are in disagreement at this point about exactly how long the Florence or its remnants will be over North Carolina. One thing that is showing is quite a slowdown once Florence comes onto land. It starts interacting with the frictional surface and really doesn't move much for the next few days. There has been, and this is a recent trend, where it actually does move it out a little faster than thinking, but it could easily be sometime in early to middle next week before we truly get the remnants of Florence out of this area. Good question.
Yeah, a lot of potential for rain to stick around. So, Brent, this graphic here on the screen shows the width, if you will, or the comparison between how far the tropical storm force winds extended versus the hurricane force winds, the wind swaths, that is. So you can kind of just look at that and get a sense for how much wider of an area that the tropical storm force winds extend out versus the hurricane. So clearly, thus far, the hurricane winds have been, confined, closer to the center, and that's not unusual. That's pretty typical.
Yeah. The next question came from Todd. He asked about what is expected rain impact, especially on Saturday. Right now, the models are continuing to show quite a bit of rain over us, and it looks like the main time frame for rainfall will actually be that Friday through Sunday time period. So while we don't have specific numbers for you, Todd, with that significant, with that being almost prime time for some of these impacts, I expect quite a bit of rainfall across the area during that time period, probably anywhere for several inches during the day Saturday at this point.
Let's see. Larry asks a question. Could not get into the webinar. Got in there late. Could we cover the track again? So let's go back to the slides here. And there's the track.
This is actually an old track.
That's an old track.
Yeah, let's go back to the first slide.
Yeah. So there's a look at the track again, and clearly, we're looking at landfall, major hurricane, still hanging on to a hurricane. As it crosses the southern I-95 corridor, and of course will weaken to a tropical storm, then a depression. So by Saturday, you're looking at tropical depression, and probably still some breezy conditions, even by Saturday, still lingering breezes in there. And so to address a question, Rebecca wanted to revise her question about air travel. So certainly Thursday, Friday. Certainly, I think there'll be some impacts to air travel, no doubt, maybe even Sunday. But again, the airline carriers, Rebecca will give you a better idea about that.
Yeah, and you were talking a little bit about the tropical storm force winds. And Jared, the next question actually talked about the duration of those tropical storm force winds. We talked about in the far south and east, we could see those winds arriving overnight Wednesday into Thursday. It does look like the Hurricane Center is predicting a depression by Saturday morning. So we're looking at Thursday morning to Saturday morning time frame being the best chance of seeing tropical storm force winds. So by 8 a.m. Saturday, you should see the winds, at least the sustained winds, dropping below that 39-mile-an-hour threshold.
Okay. So Ronnie asks, what about the sustained winds for central North Carolina? And So what's depicted here, and again, we will be providing more of those details in terms of actual numerical, wind speed predictions. We will have that in subsequent briefings, but we're still, far enough away that I think it's slightly. We're still cautious about, trying to nail down exact wind speeds when there's still some opportunity for the track to change. But suffice it to say that I think sustained winds will certainly be strong enough when you combine it with wet grounds to produce hazards and impacts that are related to things like falling trees. We've seen it here even in ordinary thunderstorms, a 45-mile-an-hour wind gust to knock over, especially the weak trees or the dead trees or the trees that are already half leaning over. So I wouldn't necessarily focus on the exact sustained or even gust for that matter, and just know that it will be strong enough again to cause some down trees and some damage.
Right. And Mark just sent a clarification that air carriers are the ones that make the decision, not necessarily the airport. You're exactly right. They're the ones with the ultimate decision there. So thanks for that clarification. So also following up with the width and size of Hurricane Florence by the time it hits the coast, as that comes a little closer to land, we're able to get more hurricane hunters flying through. We'll have a much better idea of exactly the size, the speed of the system, its strength of the system, and all that will become much more clear, especially as we're able to fly more of those planes into.
Great response there. So I think we're up to Michael's question, right?
Yes,
okay.
Very well.
So Michael, I would love to give you some advice on whether or not to cancel things or not, but we're the best we can do is provide you the weather, and then you have to make your decisions based on that. So I'm gonna answer your question with regard to what we are expecting on Thursday, and then with that, armed with that information, you can hopefully make a good call on whether or not what to do. But so the bottom line is it's going to be windy on Thursday, and yeah, things will be blowing around. so based on that response, that's. I think I'd know what I would do if I was in your shoes.
Yeah. Well, just to end up the call, and maybe we'll cover one more question at the end, I did want to showcase one of our new tools that are available, and thank you for your help, Nick. Nick actually has another conference call he has to go to. I wanted to showcase our new tropical weather page, and actually have our tropical weather focal point who's going to take you through it. This is Ryan Ellis, and he's going to take you through just a couple of the key points of this new page and what information you can get off of this webpage.
Hi, everybody. This is Ryan Ellis. Yeah, looking at the page, it's weather.gov/RA, which is our normal home page. Just add a /tropical to that, and you'll get right to this page here. The first page is obviously the outlook from the Hurricane Center, and right above that, you can see the link to our local briefing. So you can always get our briefing right there, and of course, reading the tropical weather outlook below. The next tab over is the active storms tab. This is where you're going to see the cone for Florence, and a lot of products coming out of the Hurricane Center here will all be updated here as well. So you kind of have a one-stop shop where you can get everything from the Hurricane Center and everything that we put out in the same place. If you keep scrolling down, you can see the other hurricanes there as well. So Florence will be on the top here, and so that is a good place to get that information. The next tab over is the Threats and Impacts Graphics tab. Now, these will not show up until there is a watch or a warning issued. And then you'll see, like the legend below shows, these different colors on the map, and that is for wind threat. But if you hit these radio buttons here along the top, you can also get storm surge threat, flooding rain threat, and tornado threat. So those will be created once a watch or a warning is out, and then you can click on your location in the map, and you'll get information on the right-hand side about exactly what's going on. And I clicked on it just now, and it says this graphic is not available, obviously, but this is where information will pop up once that's available. Moving on to the local products tab, once we start with watches and warnings, we also will have hurricane local statements in here, and that's where these will pop up. They will have all the details about the watches and warnings and the threats to go along with that. So good place for that. You also have a satellite view, a wide satellite view to look at with all the storms out there right now. You have localized radar, so this is focused on North Carolina, which is great. And then also, if you keep scrolling over the tabs, our social media feeds are here, so you can keep up to date with that. And then there's some preparedness flyers and links as well as some other miscellaneous information on the last tab. So one-stop shop, again, weather.gov/ra/tropical. So if you have any questions on that, let us know.
All right. Thank you so much, Ryan. This is a very useful webpage. I highly recommend you bookmark it at least for the next 2 months or so as we're in tropical or in the heat of tropical weather season. Well, thank you guys so much. This is the end of the 11:30 a.m. briefing on Hurricane Florence. We will be back with you around 5:30 p.m. this evening, and we'll be continuing these 2 times a day conference calls or webinars to keep you guys up to date as possible. So join us again at 5:30, and as always, feel free to contact us in any method that of your choosing, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you, and have a good one.